Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome. I hope everybody's keeping well and that your pre-Pesach preparations are going well and everyone's keeping calm and carrying on as we're always meant to do. I'd like to thank our sponsors for today. We have 3 sponsors for today's shir. The shir is sponsored anonymously, as all those shirim for 2024 by an anonymous donor, Ilu Nishmais Branabas Brandit and Zelig Ben Kalman. So we're very grateful for that too. And we have 2 specific donors sponsoring today's shir. The shir is sponsored in memory of Mr. Aubrey Roth, Rav Avram Yitzchak ben Hachaver Rab Chaim Shaul, whose yortzeit is today, by Mrs. Reva Roth and family. Is Mrs. Roth here? No. Okay, well, we are very grateful for that sponsorship, and the shir should be an aliyah for his neshama, Be'ezrat Hashem. And we are also very grateful to the Mrs. Rachel Steiner and the Steiner family for sponsoring the shir, also in memory of the late Professor Mark Steiner, Rav Mordechai Yehuda ben Ephraim, whose your 4th yortzeit is today. What's that? Yes. Okay, good. Whose yortzeit is on Shabbat HaGadol, I believe. And I certainly remember Professor Steiner being in the shiurim. He used to sit around here, and I have a vision of him sitting there. I prepared a shir that I think he would definitely appreciate, a bit of solid halacha and something a little bit off the beaten track and a little bit academic maybe at the end just for interest. But we're really very grateful for all of those sponsorships, and the shir should be an aliyah for all of the neshamas and a schus Be'ezrat Hashem for all of those people who need refuah shalema, pidyon shvuim, and all the hatzalah that the Jewish people need right now. Now, it's a little difficult to pick new topics to talk about before Pesach, because we've been doing this, thank God, for a long time. But I found one. And actually, it's one of these topics that the deeper you go, the more interesting it gets. So you'll have to hold on for a fairly bumpy ride. It's going to start going in some unusual directions. The topic appears to be very innocuous. Eating matzah on Erev Pesach, which of course we don't do. It's well known that eating matzah on Erev Pesach is halachically problematic, and that this minhag of avoiding matzah on Erev Pesach has expanded in different ways. I put you some examples here I gave you some examples on the sheet. Many people do not eat matzah from Rosh Chodesh. I'm sure that's quite common here. There are people who don't eat matzah from Purim. There seems to be an English minhag. I've put you some sources at the bottom. Those first 2 minhagim seem to be based on the idea that either 2 weeks before the Chag or 30 days before the Chag, you start preparing for the Chag. The 30-day minhag is less common outside England, I think, although it's a Chabad minhag and other people as well. Right, okay. So there's also a minhag not to eat maror on Erev Pesach. Some have a minhag not to eat eggs on Erev Pesach. Some people have a minhag not to eat lettuce on Erev Pesach, not to eat any vegetables used on Pesach from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. I'm not making this up, I promise you. These are all bona fide minhagim. Not to eat any fruits on Erev Pesach because we eat charoses at the table. You see, people start to get very invested in this. And the question is why? Why are people taking this so far? Ad kedei kach that the Shulchan Aruch itself feels the need to calm people down on this one. Let's start with number 1. Shulchan Aruch says, and this is going to be part of a quite complicated system we're going to set up, but we'll start it here. So the opening words here in number 1 are Kodem Shah Asirid, before the 10th hour, which is around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Says the Mechaber, the Rav Yosef Karu, Mutar le'echol matzah ashira. You're allowed to eat matzah ashira. Matzah ashira is matzah which is kneaded with either wine, kneaded with eggs, we often call it egg matzah, kneaded with fruit juice. The minhag of Ashkenazim on Pesach itself is not to eat matzah ashira. There's all sorts of different shitot in the Rishonim, whether it could be chometz or not chometz. There are more passings, it's not chometz, but unless there's a real need, you don't eat matzah ashira. But the Sfaradim are fine with matzah ashira, but he says not after the 10th hour. We'll see why soon. The Ramah carries on. Aval matzah sheyotzim ba balayla, but the matzah that you're going to use for the Seder at night, for sure, asurim le'echol kol yom arbasar. You can't eat that for the whole of the 14th, and the Mechaber agrees with that. There's not a disagreement there. But notice that his focus is on it's prohibited on the 14th because that's the matzah we'll be eating to do the mitzvah tonight. Remember that. And then he says, "V'katan she'enu yodea shemasaprim belayla." If there's a small child is younger than the age of chinuch, 3, 4, 2, maybe 4 is already the age of chinuch. B'yitzias Mitzrayim mutzah la'achila. You can give a small child matzah on Erev Pesach. V'yesh noagim shelo le'echol chazeret be'erev Pesach. There are people who don't need lettuce on Erev Pesach or horseradish. K'dei le'echol maror le'te'avon. So that you could eat the maror b'te'avon. It's funny because the maror is, you wouldn't expect b'te'avon, but you should do all the mitzvahs with te'avon. V'chein b'yom rishon shel Pesach. There are some people avoided on Yontif itself. K'dei le'echol b'leil sheni le'te'avon. Remember Pesach Yontif Yet Sheni on Pesach Seder night? You miss it? The only Yontif Sheni that I miss a little bit is second night Seder. I must tell you, because all the way through first night Seder, my wife tells me when I start talking for too long, she goes, "Darling, save that for second night." And it took me a few years after we lived in Israel already to realize that second night's not going to happen. So save that for second night has now become like a family joke. Okay, fine. You shouldn't eat too much matzah even on Yontef. High time for the same reason. And then he gets into the ones which he feels are a bit too much. There are people who don't even eat fruit. Forget about that. That's just not a real minhag. Maybe because there's no mitzvah of achila of charoses. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. We had a whole share on charoses a few years ago. There are even machmir that they won't break up matzahs. They won't make recipes with matzahs on Erev Pesach in case they come to nibble the matzahs. But that's also like, don't worry about that. Meaning people are really getting very carried away by these minhagim. And the question is why? And we'll see maybe a reason for that coming up. The basic halacha is that eating on Erev Pesach has a different halachic framework to eating on Erev, any other Chag or Erev Shabbat. And one of the reasons for that is because on the night of Pesach, there is the one remaining mitzvah to eat a specific food. Number 2, so this is what the Torah says, from on the 14th of the month, which is interesting because the mitzvah we're going to see is not the 14th, ba'erev tochlu matzah. In the evening, eat matzah. Which is interesting. Why didn't it word it on the 15th of the month, on the night, eat matzah? It doesn't say that. It says on the 14th of the month, in the evening, you have to eat matzah. Until the 21st. And last year we talked, if you remember, about whether there's a mitzvah to eat matzah the whole of the 7 days of Pesach, and if so, what kind of mitzvah that is. But from the fact that the Torah words it, on the 14th you eat matzah in the evening, almost sounds like it's implying, but don't eat matzah on the 14th during the day. And there are those who want to read that out of the pasuk, that it's not just a rabbinic decree, we'll see in a minute why that was, not to eat matzah during the day of the 14th, but it's even implied in the verse itself that you can only eat the matzah at night. And we'll come back to that verse very soon. The Mishnah picks up on this. Look, number 3. We'll go quite quickly at the beginning of the shir because I want to make sure I have time for the more exciting things at the end. Number 3. A Mishnah at the beginning of the 10th Perek in Pesachim that on the Erev Pesach, close to Mincha, and the Gemara concludes and the Rishonim conclude this is Mincha Katana in the afternoon, around a half an hour before Mincha Katana, which is around 4 o'clock. Lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. You can't eat until it gets dark. Well, what can't you eat? And why only from 4 o'clock? So the Gemara picks up. Number 4. Why did you pick on Erev Pesach? Aren't there restrictions on a regular Erev Shabbos, a regular Erev Chag? The Tanya, because there's a brisa. You can't eat on every Erev Chag, every Erev Shabbos from Mincha onwards, so that you enter Shabbos or Chag with an appetite. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can eat on a regular Erev Shabbos, a regular Erev Chag, not Pesach. You can eat until it gets dark. So, Amar Rav Huna, why is this Mishnah there? Why are we talking about Pesach differently? Rabbi Yossi. We only need it because of Rabbi Yossi. On a regular Erev Shabbos, on a regular Erev Sukkot, Erev Shavuot, he says you can eat. Why isn't he worried about an appetite? Because there's no actual mitzvah to eat on Shabbos. There's a mitzvah of oneg Shabbos. And strictly speaking, oneg Shabbos is whatever gives you oneg. And if you're already a little bit full from Friday, so you'll eat less. If that's what gives you oneg, then fine. You like lettuce, eat lettuce through Shabbos, it's fine. But on Pesach, there's an actual mitzvah to eat. He says, Hani mili, third line, be'erev Shabbos is v'yamim tovim. Rabbi Yossi is only lenient up until nightfall on a regular Erev Chag. Aval be'erev Pesach, on Erev Pesach, mishum chiyuv de matzah, moide. Because of the special chiyuv of matzah, we're extra careful on Erev Shabbos afternoon. Erev Pesach, thank you, afternoon. Just testing, okay? Erev Pesach afternoon. Okay, simple enough. On Erev Pesach, you really have to give yourself an appetite. The reality of the way we do Seder these days is many people don't end up eating their dinner at Seder night, Shulchan Aruch, till 11 o'clock at night. So actually in the Manning family, we are quite particular to eat on Pesach afternoon something quite substantial so that everybody has energy to get through through Magid. Because if people are passing out during Magid, then that doesn't help anything because that actually is a Torah mitzvah to say the Haggadah. The other two things that we do to keep people going is we give people a lot of drinks, caffeine and sugar. During Magid, there are people who are machmeh who say you shouldn't drink anything during Magid. There's not a chumrah that my Rabbonim held, and they said that it's good to serve Coke and coffee, etc., keep people going. And also, not to let people talk for too long. We have a rule in our Seder, if you have anything to say, second night, apart from that, which we can't get away with anymore, if you can say it in less than 2 minutes, you can say it during Magid. But if not, we'd love to hear it during the meal. Okay, that's what we always say. And it has to be something relevant to Yetzias Mitzrayim as well. Okay, fine. So what is it that you can't eat on Erev Pesach? It didn't mention matzah specifically. This was just generally you can't eat. So look at number 5. The Gemara clarifies, Amar Rabbi Asi, Aval matbil hu b'mini targima. You can have snacks. You can, matbil is always, you can smear a little bit of hummus and vegetables. Rabbi Yitzchak matbil b'yarki. Rabbi Yitzchak said you can have vegetable snacks. Hummus may be a little problematic. Yes, okay, fine. For the Sfaradim amongst us. Okay, fine. Okay. Not giving you a share about kitniot. Okay. Hummus equivalent. And actually the Shulchan Aruch in the end paskins on this issue, number 6, Asur le'echol pats. You can't have anything which is pat, which will be matzah ashira. That's all that's left, we'll see. Misha asiris ulamala, from 4 o'clock onwards. Kidesh yochel matzah le'tehavon. So you'll come to eat matzah on Seder night with a good appetite. Aval oichel ma'at peiros. You can have a little bit of fruit. Yerakos, you can have some vegetables. Aval yimali kreis samahem. Just be careful not to get too full. And the Mishnah Brura says also in Ma'at Peiros in number 7, V'hu adin basar, you could have some chicken if you like, you could have some meat, the dagim, have fish, beitzim, v'chiyah gagni. You can have really anything you like on Erev Pesach, except matzah, pat, which would be matzah ashir, which Ashkenazim tend to not eat anyway. Aval mechamesh isaminim shemavusha b'mei Peiros asur decide. But nothing that's going to fill you up. Okay, fine. So far, very straightforward. On Erev Pesach, we don't eat after the 10th hour, anything that's going to fill us up. The Sfaradim stop eating matzah ashira. It's not clear, by the way, from the Ramah whether Ashkenazim are allowed to eat matzah ashira on Erev Pesach. He doesn't say explicitly, but I brought you in the footnote different people that say in different directions. People tend not to eat matzah ashira even on Erev Pesach after the Zman when you can't eat chometz. But why didn't the Mishnah mention the prohibition of eating matzah on Erev Pesach? All it talks about is from the 10th hour onwards, not to get too full. What about the obvious prohibition? Isn't there the whole day long a prohibition to eat matzah on Erev Pesach? Why isn't that in the Mishnah? That's a bit of a surprise. Where does it come from? So the answer is it comes from the Talmud Yerushalmi. And this is where things start to become a little bit more involved. Because if you look in number 8, this is quite a famous source. Amar Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi says in the Yerushalmi, Ha'oichel matzah be'erev ha'pesach, anyone who eats matzah on Erev Pesach, kaba'al arusasoi bebeis chamif, is like someone who sleeps with his fiancée in her parents' home. And anyone who sleeps with his fiancé, his arusa, it's not quite a fiancé, someone who's been through erusin, we'll see soon, someone who sleeps with his fiancé, and it's called that in her parents' home, loike, gets malchus. Now, first of all, what's one thing got to do with the other? That's the most appropriate comparison you can make. As far as I'm aware, it doesn't say about any other thing that you do wrong that it's as if you slept with your fiancé in your parents' home. Now, obviously, there's a clear connection. Is that you couldn't wait till the wedding. You had to eat the matzah early. We'll see. It goes much deeper than that. But also, it doesn't say here that someone who eats matzah on Erev Pesach gets malchus. It says someone who eats matzah on Erev Pesach is like someone who sleeps with their and they would get malchus. Well, why would they get malchus? What exactly did they do wrong? He's married to his arusa. After Erusin, which is when they put the ring on the finger and say, Hari Ab Mukadeshetli, halachically they're married. They would need a get to separate. So why is it so terrible? Okay, they didn't wait for the Sheva Brachas under the chuppah. But is it so terrible? They're man and wife. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I can't resist just adding the slightly off-color remark, which is quoted either in the name of Achad Ha'am or in the name, I heard it, of Bialik, or in the name of Smolensky, that it says in the Yerushalmi there that it's eating matzah on Erev Pesach is as if you slept with your fiancée in your parents' home, her parents' home. So he said, whoever he was, believe me, I did both and they're not the same. Okay? Okay, fine. So you can work out who it's really attributed to. So what's going on here? How does this fit with the Mishnah? So there are different ways of understanding it. Number 9, let's go over to page 3. Number 9 is a Tosfos Rid. Now Tosfos Rid takes the view, actually, that eating matzah on Erev Pesach was only a problem for the Yerushalmi. And the Bavli did not have that problem. And in fact, you can eat matzah on Erev Pesach up until the 10th hour. Now, we don't paskin like this, but the Tosfos Rid felt this was a Yerushalmi issue. Look at number 9. Why does our Mishnah say you have to stop eating at the 10th hour? Surely earlier in the day, what are you going to eat? Chametz you can't eat. From like 10 in the morning. So you can't eat chametz. Matzah nami asura, and you can't eat matzah surely. Kedamrim b'Yerushalmi, and doesn't it say in the Yerushalmi, Kol ha'oichel matzah be'erev ha'Pesach ki'ilu bo el harasasu bebeis chamei v'yokal. Okay, quotes Yerushalmi. V'chi tema yochel peres. So if you say it means eat fruit, you can even eat fruit right until the evening. B'mini targim kedamrim b'Gemara. So he gives a couple of answers. V'oimeri, one answer is matzah ashira. That's what you have to stop eating that you could have eaten earlier in the day. But then he says at the end of the third line, you don't have to tie yourself in knots here. What was it the Mishnah said you should stop eating? How do you know that our Mishnah held of this prohibition in the Yerushalmi? Leisley didn't. If there would have been a real issue of eating matzah on Erev Pesach, believe me, he says, the Mishnah would have told you. The Mishnah didn't say that. The Yerushalmi said that. But then he concludes, therefore it must be that we, elavadai, he says at the end, kol koidem de mincha shari lemechel matzah. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know if he did this in his community in Provence, in northern France, the Tosfos Rid, but he said, as far as I'm concerned, this issue is not la halacha. The Bavli and the Mishnah are ruling that you can eat matzah all day until the 10th hour. Only the Yerushalmi has a problem with that. Now, that's not how we paskin, because all the heavyweights say otherwise. Look at the Rif, number 10. Amar Rebbe Levi. So the Rif says, in North Africa, 11th century, ha'oichel matzah be'erev Pesach kabala resasa bebeis chamiv va'abara resasa bebeis chamiv loike. Quotes the Yerushalmi. And the Rambam also quotes the Yerushalmi. But the Rambam adds something else which is very perplexing. Look at number 11. Says the Rambam, Asru chachamim le'echol matzah be'erev ha'Pesach. The chachamim have prohibited eating matzah on Erev Pesach. We don't yet know exactly why, but we'll look at why in a minute. And if you eat matzah on Erev Pesach, we give you malchus, makas mardus, we give you rabbinic lashes, ad sheteitze nafsho, until you die. That's very perplexing, because I gave you in the footnote a little mention that the Rambam mentions makus mardus, rabbinic lashes, which of course we don't do today, but the Torah says up to 39 lashes. But when there's a rabbinic prohibition, they have something called makas mardus, the lashes for rebellion against the rabbis. And the Rambam mentions this 104 times in the Mishnah Torah. And the only place that he says, ad sheteitze nafsho, until he dies, is here. On Erev Pesach, eating matzah. What's going on? Why is everybody using their most extreme formulations for eating matzah on Erev Pesach? Now, you could get out of this quite simply and say, those words shouldn't be there. They're the wrong girsa. Meaning, if he says it 104 times, and this is the only place he says it, it's probably not meant to be there. And Taka, if you look at some of the Acharonim, they say, yep, it's the incorrect girsa. Look at the manuscripts from before printing. Look at the early printings of the Rambam. They do not have these words, ad sheteitze nafsha. They came in 1574 from the Venice printing. But the problem is that many of the Rishonim who quote the Rambam clearly did have this, because they're all perplexed. They're all asking, why is he saying this? The Ritva had this girsa, and the Ran had this girsa, and the Rabbeinu Noach had this girsa. And actually, if you look at the Frankel Rambam, which is probably the most accurate in terms of quoting other girsaot, other versions, it leaves these words in. It does say in a footnote that other people don't have them in, but it left them in presumably because they appear in so many of the medieval manuscripts. So what are we going to do with the Rambam? So the Ran, which I'm not going to read inside in number 12, he looks at this Rambam and he says, you know something? He's right. And he only needs to say it once. And it applies all of the other 103 times as well. Well, he's going to have to say this 104 times. You read it here. It applies everywhere else. Why is this rabbinic lashes so much more serious, if you like, than the Torah lashes? Because there's a worse problem at root here. The person is rebelling against the rabbis. Obviously, if he does tshuva in the middle of the lashes and says, okay, I won't do it anymore, I'll stop. Fine, you can stop. But with a Torah prohibition, okay, someone ate pork. They were warned, and they ate it, and they said, I just couldn't resist it. I'm really sorry. If I get lashes, I get them. Okay, so you get up to however many that based in things appropriate, up to 39. But someone who's rebelling against the rabbinic system, against the halachic system, says the Ran, now you know why it's so serious to rebel against the rabbinic system, and this is what the Rambam means. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. But others say, no, I brought you from Rav Zilberstein in the Chashukei Chemed in number 13. He brings other people and says, look, it could be what's going on here is that there is something different about Erev Pesach. Hitaka means it here, and he doesn't say it elsewhere. Why? Because there's a quasi-Torah prohibition, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. It's not just a rabbinic fence. There's something more going on here. And if you flip over to page 4, you'll see it in number 14, the Rokeach. The Rokeach was a Kabbalistic source. The Rabbi Eliezer of Worms, this is not a particular Kabbalistic idea, but he quotes here in number 14, Asur le'echol matzah be'erev Pesach. You can't eat matzah on Erev Pesach, because it says, Ba'erev tochlu matzot. Eat matzah in the evening. Don't eat matzah earlier on. And also, number 15, Va'achlu es habasar b'layla hazeh. The Pasuk says you must eat the meat, the Pesach, on that night. And you eat it with matzah, and you eat it with maror. And I brought you a reference in the footnotes. Rav Menachem Kasha has a whole section in Parshas Bo in his Torah Shalema where he talks about all of these different opinions that seem to see eating matzah on Erev Pesach as something even more serious than a regular Issa D'Rabbanon, which is serious enough, but maybe it's because of these ideas. So what are the reasons? What's the problem? What are they worried about? Why should we not be able to eat matzah on Erev Pesach? So there are 3 reasons given. Look in number 16. This is the Bahag. Again, these are very, very old sources. This is a very old issue. We'll see, maybe even goes back to temple times. So the Bahag in Babylon in the 9th century says as follows. Pasak va'asin lemeichel matzah miba'id yom. You're not allowed to, you have to stop eating matzah on the 14th during the day. Mekamid l'kadesh, before you make kiddush. Va'oim haggadah, before you make that, say the haggadah, v'halel, and say halel. Shnei amar, be'erev tochlu matzah. He brings that source we saw in the Rokeach. Eat matzah in the evening, kedei sheyehei chaviv alav. And he gives a reason. Because if you eat the matzah during the day, you won't really enjoy it in the evening. You really need to enjoy it. You have to have simchas ha-mitzvahs. Avas Hashem. Having simcha in mitzvahs is not just an added extra. It is part of the kiyum. It's part of the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol miyodecha. And this is the one thing that we've got left, which is a Torah mitzvah to eat. I know Jewish people eat the whole year round, but most of the time they don't have to, actually. Even on Shabbos, even on Yom Tov, it's not a Torah mitzvah to eat. Here there's a Torah mitzvah to eat the matzah. Okay, on Erev Yom Kippur, we'll see that in a minute. Also, there's a mitzvah to eat, and maybe on Sukkah's first night in the Sukkah. But if you're going to do this one remaining mitzvah, you have to have chavivas mitzvahs. And this is presumably why people stop on Rosh Chodesh, people stop on Purim. I don't know anyone who goes before Purim, but it's chavivas mitzvah. And then he brings u'moshel, and there's a moshel la'arush sheba la'arusoseh bebeis chamav, which is very interesting because what have those two things got together? Got to do with each other? The problem with the guy who sleeps with his fiancée too early is not that he jumped the gun and she jumped the gun. It's because it won't be the same anymore. Your wedding night's meant to be the wedding night. Chavivas mitzvahs. You are meant to be investing in that special moment, and you've ruined the special moment. And I think that's an important point on two levels, hashkafically as well, that remembering that the mitzvahs we have to do has to be b'chavivas, has to be with excitement, enthusiasm, is something we sometimes need to remind ourselves. Not everybody loves matzah. Actually, a lot of people like matzah. They just don't like what it does to their digestive system. But you don't worry about that. You know, we can always daven for a miracle this year. It won't be the same. It's a year of miracles. But here he's saying also there's another idea. You have to create magical moments. They don't create themselves. And if you don't put in the prep beforehand, it's just not going to happen. Everyone in this room knows, because you've made Sidorim, but I tell my younger students who have never really made Sidorim, so Seder has to be choreographed. It doesn't just happen. You don't just sit around the table and like, whoa, what's the first thing to do? It has to be planned in advance, and part of that planning is holding back from the things that are going to make it more special. Okay, so that's the first reason. The second reason, the Rambam gives a different reason, number 17. So there will be a heker. And that's not the same thing as enjoying the mitzvah. A heker means there'll be a clear difference between what you ate before and what you're eating now. Meaning, if you were eating matzah all the way through Erev Pesach, and then you just chomp a little bit more matzah on Seder night, so like it doesn't feel like you're doing anything different. You might forget to have that special kavanah that this is a mitzvah. That wasn't a mitzvah, but this is a mitzvah. We see this in a few places. For example, we dafka don't blow the shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And okay, there are other reasons, la'arbevis, as satan, etc. But one of the reasons is heker. Because if we blow the shofar every single day through Elul and then on Rosh Hashanah, okay, yeah, we blow the shofar every day, including Rosh. No, today is very different. Today is a mitzvah. Yesterday was a minhag, so we leave a day to make a heker, so that we don't have shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Even eating on Yom Kippur, there are those poskim that say that the mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur, I should say, not Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Kippur, is to create a heker, that the reason I'm fasting tonight is dafka for a mitzvah. Meaning if I don't eat any of the time, so what's the difference not eating yesterday and not eating today? I don't eat. I'm just someone that doesn't like eating. You have to dafka make yourself eat on Erev Yom Kippur, so that when you stop eating, you know, I've stopped eating, and there's a reason I've stopped eating. This idea of a heker is very interesting. Although we don't apply it across the board. We never see anywhere that it says there's a prohibition of sleeping in the sukkah on Erev Sukkos, to make sure that you know that you're sleeping on Sukkot for a mitzvah, or that you'll enjoy sleeping on Sukkot more. We don't see that. Why are we applying this for Erev Pesach more than for other Chagim? There's another reason which I'm not getting into too much in number 18, which the Rabbi brings down, which is that you're not allowed to get into a meal on Erev Pesach, whether it's chometz earlier in the day or later in the day when you can't eat chometz, or matzah, because you might forget to do the Korban Pesach. You might not go and do the Korban Pesach. We don't want you getting into things on Erev Pesach because it's a busy day and there are things to do. So you'll ask yourself, well, the Ravya lived in the Middle Ages. There'd been no Korban Pesach for 1,000 years by the time he says this. In what way is that even relevant to us today? And the answer is, it does survive. Have a look over on page number 5. See, for example, number 19, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Again, no Korban Pesach today. Ha'oiseh malacha be'erev Pesach michatzos ulamala. If you do malacha on Pesach, on Erev Pesach afternoon after chatzos, hayu meshamtim osa. We put you in cherem. Again, a very extreme reaction to doing something on Erev Pesach. We put you in cherem because you wanted to do the gardening. You wanted to plant the rose bushes. Apparently, you can't do it on Pesach, Erev Pesach afternoon. Even if you're going to do work for people for no pay, you're going to go around and help people work for them for no pay. Asur, you're not allowed to do it. There are even people that say you can't ask a non-Jew to do work for you on Erev Pesach in the afternoon. People allow that and says them, well, that is the minhag. Is this the halacha? It is the halacha. Look at the Mishnah Berurah, number 20. Hatam, the reason is, mipnei shehu zman shchitat haPesach. This is the time that we shech the Korban Pesach. Now, this is not the Rambam who is writing the halacha as if the Beis HaMikdash was still there. Like on Seder night, the Rambam says, and then you eat the Korban Pesach. And if there's no Beis HaMikdash, then you don't eat the Korban Pesach. But here's the Mishnah Berurah. He says, no, we can't do work on Erev Pesach afternoon because of the Zman Shchitas Pesach. Okay? Shekol echad miYisrael chayvo, and every Jew has to bring the Korban Pesach, obviously if they're in Yerushalayim. V'yom she'mevi'in korban hu ki yonsef, and the day that you bring a korban is like a personal yonsef. And since all of Klal Yisrael are involved in that yonsef, l'chein also midivrei sofrim, therefore there's a rabbinic prohibition b'malacha, of doing malacha, afilu bizman hazeh, even today. The lake korban, when there's no korban adayin. The ha'isa b'makoma adayin, ha'isa b'makoma omed. The yisa still stays in place. So don't be too quick to dismiss this idea of, well, it's the time for Korban Pesach, because this still impacts on the halacha. For example, if you're going to have a shave before Pesach, because you're not shaving until Lag BaOmer, so do it before Chatzos, because after Chatzos has a din at least of Chol HaMoed. A lot of people don't realize this. This is a very interesting halachic idea. So there are three different reasons given for why there's a problem to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. One is because matzah will be extra special on Seder night. Another is you make a heker because it's going to be difficult to see the difference. You have to have the right kavanot for the mitzvah. And a third reason is because we don't want to get into a meal because it's the zman, it's the time for shechting the Korban Pesach. Now classically, whenever you have a chakira of this kind where everyone knows it's prohibited, but some people say for this reason, or for that reason, or for the other reason, there are halachic nafkaminas, there are halachic outcomes that come on from that. For example, are you allowed to eat matzah ashira? What's the problem with matzah ashira later on? So if you look here, some people will say that matzah ashira is permitted earlier on Erev Pesach. It's matzah. How can you eat it? It's Erev Pesach. So according to the Marashah, you can eat matzah ashira in the morning, at least for Sfaradim, because it doesn't taste the same. And you won't have a disappointment when you eat matzah on the night because it tastes different. It's a completely different taste. Others, the Rambam says, no, you can't eat matzah ashira, or you can rather eat matzah ashira in the morning because you can't fulfill your mitzvah with matzah ashira. Again, they give this permission to eat matzah ashira, but for different reasons. One group says it tastes different. Another group says it's nothing to do with the taste. It's about whether you can do the mitzvah with it. Okay, so what about things that other things that would fit into this category? Can you eat kneidlach on Erev Pesach? This is a big shaila, okay, for many people. Kneidlach. So what is the reason that you can eat matzah ashira? So if it's because it tastes different to the regular matzah, therefore there's no problem of chivuv ha-mitzvah. Do kneidlach taste like matzah? Not really. So kneidlach are not going to take away from the matzah experience. What about if it's the reason that you can't eat anything that you'd fulfill the mitzvah with? It's about the heker. And if you fulfill the mitzvah with it, you can't. Can you fulfill the mitzvah on Seder night of matzah by eating kneidlach? No, also not. Why not? Because they're boiled, because they're cooked. And the matzah has to be baked and not cooked. And therefore most poskim hold, if you look in number 22, aval im bashla, if you cook matzah, like we do in our countries, la'asod kadurim, we make little balls, mimatzah shekarim kneidlach. And if you didn't know what they were, he tells you they're called kneidlach. Or matzah mavashelit b'kli rishon, or you want to cook matzah in a kli rishon, you want to boil it up, make a kind of matzah pudding. Mutza la'achlo kodim sha'asirus. You can eat it before the 10th hour. Again, after the 10th hour, it's a different concern. The concern is you're going to get full. Too much matzah pudding, you won't have an appetite. There's a vadai lo mikri matzah because it's just not called matzah, and therefore he says knedlach are okay. There were others, by the way, that said no. Rav Shlomo Kluger says you can't eat knedlach on Erev Pesach. Maybe because he holds that they taste like matzah a little bit. Don't know. Depends on your knedlach. My grandmother, Alei Shalom, used to make knedlach on Pesach that were completely different to the knedlach she made during the year. Obviously, they were made of matzah meal, but they were a big cannonball. She didn't make little knedlach. She just made a bowl of soup with one massive knedlach in the middle. Okay, and a little bit of soup around the side, which it's very interesting. That was to me as a child, that was one of the main differences with Pesach and the rest of the year. What about matzahs which are baked by non-Jews? What about regular matzahs baked under supervision by non-Jews? And they're definitely 18-minute matzahs. They're completely kosher Pesach. But you can't fulfill the mitzvah of achilas matzah on Seder night with those matzahs. Why not? Because they weren't made l'shem mitzvah. So they taste like matzah, and therefore for that reason, you would not be allowed to eat them on Erev Pesach if the problem is chivuv ha-mitzvahs. But you can't fulfill the mitzvah of Seder night with them. So for that reason, you would be allowed to eat them on Erev Pesach because they're not the same as mitzvah matzahs. So you can see these reasons do impact in different ways. What about matzah cake that you make with matzah meal? Now that's baked. So you could, in theory, fulfill the mitzvah of achilas matzah, eating a matzah cake, and therefore maybe you can't eat that on Erev Pesach. But it doesn't taste like matzah because it's sweet and got a honey and stuff. And therefore, how does that work? So that's one interesting discussion. What about when do you have to stop eating matzah? So the Shulchan Aruch says in the morning. The Magen Avraham says maybe the night before. So again, maybe that's part of this question. If the problem is making a heker, I have to stop, and therefore when I start again it's for a mitzvah, maybe it's enough during the day. Maybe it's to be chaviv. Maybe how long do you need not eating matzah for matzah to be special? So maybe you need a whole day. Maybe you need 2 weeks. Maybe you need a whole month. I don't know. So you see, that is one of the things that turn on this. The minhag is that people can eat matzah if they... Most people in this room probably don't eat matzah from at least Rosh Chodesh. But there are people, by the way, who are very negative about that minhag. My wife and I have this discussion every year. This year, when I researched, I find more sources to support my position against my wife. So that was it was part of our shalom bias, whatever. But I found more sources on her side as well, which was okay. It goes with the territory. But for example, there are those that mock the minhag of stopping eating matzah from before Erev Pesach because it says Erev Pesach, who are you to add on extra? It's not rabbim that stop eating, it's reikim, which is the word. People who are ignorant stop eating before Erev Pesach. But it's interesting, most people do have that minhag, and therefore the night before Pesach is not going to be really a question for them. By the way, Rabbi Chaim Brisker has a very interesting raya and says that it's obvious you can eat matzah the night before Pesach. Because what does it say? Manishtana halal hazeh mikol halelot, shebachol al halelot, anu ochlim chametz u'matzah. It's a nice proof. Anyway, all of this is interesting enough, but I want to get back to the point that we started with is, what's it got to do with the fiancée in her parents' home? Let's get back to that. So, the Levush, go to page number 6. The Levush says the following. He brings an obvious comparison. Levush is living in Poland in the 16th century. Amru Chazal, ha'oichel matzah ve'erev Pesach k'boil ha'resaso b'beis chamiv. K'loima, the k'moish ha'boil ha'resaso ba'oida b'beis chamiv. Just like a couple that can't wait for the wedding, loike, and they get malchus, okay, I love makas maridas, midrabanon, al shimari godel ta'avasoi, because they're taivadik. They're not doing it for the mitzvah anymore. Meaning the relationship between the husband and the wife has to be l'shem mitzvah. It also has to be bekavana. And they're clearly just doing it because they can't wait. Ushehu lahut v'shatuf b'zima. He and she, for that matter, she's part of this as well, are so wrapped up in their promiscuity, even with each other. You couldn't wait. Ad shemachnisa lechuppah shemavarchin alav sheva brachas. You make sheva brachas under the chuppah, sanctifying the union, the cohabitation of the two. And similarly, someone who eats matzah on Erev Pesach, he shows ta'avasai v'rav tanusai, that he's a taivadik person, he's a gluttonous person.
she'einu yachal lehitzapek lahamtin ad halayla. You can't wait until night. Sheyivarech sheva brachas kodem sheyochel hamatzah. Because there are sheva brachas before you get to the matzah, which are Kagain, Birkas Hayayin, Brei Pri Hagafen, Kiddush, Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanim, Zman, Shechianu, Netilas Yadayim, for bread, for matzah, Borei Pri Hadama di Yerakos, for karpas, Birkas Hamotzi, the Hamotzi on the matzah, or Birkas Alachilas matzah. So if anyone ever asks you, what are the Sheva brachas? Your answer is, well, are you talking about the Sheva brachas under the chuppah, or are you talking about the Sheva brachas at the Seder night? And he says it's the same. He didn't make this up, by the way. It's already in the Ravya, it's in the Rishonim, the idea of having Sheva brachas at the Seder night. And therefore you give him malchus. Gam kein makas mardas midrabanon im oichel b'yom kaidim baruchu kol brachas halalu. So he says it's very similar idea. And the Sheva brachas reinforce it. And that might be why we're not so focused on the issue on Erev Sukkos. Because there aren't Sheva brachas on Sukkot night. There are Sheva brachas, if you like, on Seder night. By the way, one of my close friends is making a chasna in a couple of days for one of his children, and they actually will have Sheva brachas at Seder night, which raises an interesting question. What do you do? Where do you bring in the extra cup? Where do you make the Sheva brachas and da-da-da? So he'll have two Sheva brachas. They'll have the regular Sheva brachas, and they'll have the Sheva brachas of the Seder. And Panim Chadash, you can always find people to invite to Seder. I discussed this with my son, who is a very Tanakh-focused mind. We had Shabbos lunch with him, and I said, "What do you think about this idea of Sheva brachas for the matzah?" And the eating the matzah suddenly becomes a much more meaningful and much more intimate idea. That's, if you like, the consummation that you're waiting till the right moment. And my son Asher looked at me and says, "Well, isn't it obvious? Like, people who know Tanakh think it's obvious." And said, "That's the whole point of lechem oini." I said, "What are you talking about?" Lechem oini is a poor man's bread. That's what lechem oini means. The matzah has to be lechem oini. But already Chazal make the connection between oni, being poverty and affliction, and oina, being the man and wife coming together and having the mitzvah of them being with each other. That is called the mitzvah of oina. And if you don't believe me, look at what it says in number 24. It says, we're going to say on Seder, we cried out to God, he saw our oini. Now the pshat is he saw our suffering. But what do we say on Seder night? Number 25. Vayaret anyenu zo precious derech eretz. That was our inability to have oina, to be together with the men and the women. As it says, Vayare Elokim et bnei Yisrael, God saw the Jewish people, Vayeda Elokim, and he knew. He knew. No more needs to be said. Say it in a way which is sniut. He knew. And of course, Vayeda Adam et Ishto, that Adam knew his wife, is also a reference to the idea of them being together. And therefore, what you have is not just Sheva brachas, but you have a moment of connecting with the matzah of Lechem Oini, which is resonance of the ability to, if you like, bond in that really intimate way with mitzvot, with Torah, and of course, Shir HaShirim. Why do we read Shir HaShirim? On Seder, on Pesach. Shir HaShirim is the love song between Hashem and the Jewish people. So what's really going on here with this mashal of the Yerushalmi? It's like someone who slept with their fiancé. It's actually a very powerful mashal as to what Pesach is all about. But there may be something even more than that. And for the last 10 minutes or so of the shir, I want to explore with you an idea that I saw. I was researching this, and I saw it online by a Sephardi Rav called Rav Chaim Ovadia. I think he lives in America, I'm not sure. I don't know him, but he had this idea on a site which was a Sephardic site, and it's absolutely fascinating. This idea of the Yerushalmi, that somebody has this illicit and premature relationship in their father-in-law's house. So where else do we read about father-in-law's houses? The arusa in the father-in-law's house. So it's actually fascinating that this comes up right in the mitzvahs of Pesach. Look at number 26. There's a Mishnah in Pesachim. 26, on page 6. 26. And we'll spend the rest of the shir on this idea. Ha'hoylech lishchait et pischoi. Someone who is on the way to shecht their korban Pesach. Ulemul et banoi, or to give a bris milah to their son. Ule'echol sudas ha'erusin bebeis chamav. Or to eat their sudas erusin and we'll talk about Erusin in a minute, in their father-in-law's house, the Nizka, and they remember, sheyesh lo chametz b'toich beis, so that they've got chametz in the house that they forgot to destroy. So what should they do? Im yochel lachzor levayer, if they can get back home, just destroy it, burn it quickly. The lachzor lemitzvah, so they can get back to do their mitzvah. Yachzor v'yaver, then go home and get rid of it. The im lav, and if you can't get back in time, mevatloi beliboy. This is the mitzvah we see in the Mishnah of bittul chametz. This is where we see it. You can do bittul in your mind. You can't get back home, and you can't get back in time. So, on your way to Shech the Korban Pesach, I get that. That's a very Pesach-dik kind of mitzvah to be involved in, and it's one of the only mitzvot asay that you chayav kares if you don't do. I get that. Going on the way to give a bris milah to your son, so bris milah and Korban Pesach are also very connected. Very connected. And that's the other mitzvah for which if you don't perform it, the only other positive mitzvah that a person is chayav kares. So if you wanted to pick two mitzvahs which are the mitzvahs that used as an example, that if you don't have time to get back to them, you can do bittul chametz, I'd get those two. But what's the third mitzvah? Someone who is on his way to eat his sudas erusin in his parents-in-law to be's house. Like, where did that come from? I mean, I can think of a million mitzvahs that I might be on the way to do. It suddenly picks that you're on the way to eat your wedding meal for the erusin in your parent-in-law's house. Is it coincidence that that is exactly the example given by the Yerushalmi? It can't be coincidence. Baruch Hashem, I get to learn a lot of Torah and prepare shirim. I never even thought 2 minutes about eating your sudas erusin in your parents-in-law house, and then all of a sudden 2 things jump out of the page that strike you on it, which is very interesting indeed. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. What is an arusa? I'm hopefully running a wedding later on today. And everybody knows that under the chuppah, there are 2 stages to the wedding. There's kiddushin or erusin, which is when they actually become man and wife, where he puts a ring on her finger and says, Hari at mekudeshet li. Then they are halachically married. Then there is nisuin. Nisuin is the Sheva Brachas, chuppah. It's interesting that in halacha, kiddushin is very clearly defined and agreed upon. It's when he puts that ring on the finger and she accepts it and he says, Hari at mekudeshet li. Chuppah, which is the stage 2 of the wedding, there are about 8 different opinions as to what chuppah is. It's the bedekan, it's the chuppah, it's the talis over their heads, it's the sheva brachas, it's the yichud room, it's interesting. Chuppah is a lot of different opinions on how it works. But we do those 2 things together. They used to separate them. The Gemara says they used to do erusin, and then 12 months later, they used to, by the time they've saved up to make the wedding, because you have to save money in order to make a wedding. A lot of people don't realize that today. They think you just have to ring mom and dad and they can make the wedding. You have to save money. And then 12 months later, you do the nisuin. So there was a whole time of, sometimes a year, that she was an arusa, where she's married to the man, but she's still living in her parents' home. They haven't done the nisuin. Today, we use the word arusa for someone who got engaged. That is not correct, halachically. The engagement is, from a halachic perspective, not really erusin, it's really called shidduchim, which is that we intend to get married. But erusin is the ring on the finger. However, when the woman becomes an arusa, she's actually very strongly prohibited to be with the husband. Look at number 29. Kala beloy bracha. A kala who has not yet had sheva brachas, asura leba'ala kenida. She is not allowed to be with her husband on the same level, as it were, this is rabbinic prohibition according to most, as a nida. Ma nida shelo tavla asura leba'ala, just like a nida who had not been to the mikveh is not allowed to go to be with her husband. Afkala beloy bracha asura leba'ala. Again, a very strong prohibition. The Rambam rules that this is a rabbinic prohibition. Number 30. Ha'arusa asura leba'ala. An arusa is prohibited to be with her husband, midivrei sofrim, on a rabbinic level. Calls man shehiba beis aviyah, as long as she's in her father's house, her parents' house. V'haba ala rusaso beis chamayv, and someone who sleeps with his arusa, they sleep together in the parents-in-law's house. Makinosa makas mardos. Who doesn't kill? Oh no, yeah, you might know that only if you eat matzah on erev Pesach. That's when you. But makas mardos. By the way, if she sleeps with him in the husband's house, that might already be nisuin on some level. That might already be the consummation of the marriage. The point is that he does it when she's in her parents' house. but shows that it's illicit. That shows that he's not doing it in a way, as it were, which is kosher. And in fact, the bracha that we make, look in number 32 for a second, the bracha we make under the chuppah, says the Kesef Mishra, who's Rav Yosef Karo, Zen nilmad min nusach brachas ha'eresin. We bracha we say under the chuppah, he says, Va'asar lanu ha'arusos. Why do we say, why does the Masadi Kiddushin make a bracha? He's telling the Chatan and Kala that even though you are now Arus and Arusa, you are really prohibited to each other. Kalami midrabanon. Shigazru al yichud pnuya va'afal Arusa. They didn't allow a husband to be together with his Arusa. V'lo itiru achi tikanis l'chuppah, until he's been to the chuppah. K'moshe amru meseches kala b'loi bracha v'asru lebala kenida. Okay, fine. So we all know that it's really not okay for a man to have relations with his Arusa in her parents' home. Did anyone do that? The answer is absolutely. That was the minhag of the area of Yehuda. That was what the people in Yehuda actually did. How so? Have a look in number 33. So the Mishnah, at the time of the Mishnah, divides Eretz Yisrael into a number of different areas. I actually had a chat with a neighbor, a friend of ours, Shuli Mishkin, who does tours, knows a lot about these things, very interesting. I got some perspective from her. The Eretz Yisrael is divided up into certain areas. There's Yerushalayim, which after the Romans, certainly after the Hadrianic persecution, was really free of Jews. They were not able to be in Yerushalayim, they were thrown out. There's Yehuda, which is the area around Yerushalayim, Gush Etzion, Hebron, etc. There's the Galil, there's Ava HaYardan, in Transjordan, and there's Hadrom, there's Droma, down south, in the Negev, Beersheba, etc. So the minhagim in the Galil and the minhagim in Yehuda were quite different. Have a look in number 33. Someone who eats with his father-in-law, Yehuda, in the area of Yehuda, Shaloi be'edim, and there are no edim there checking that he's not up to any funny business. He can't turn around after the chuppah and claim that his wife was not a betula. Why? Because, well, okay, no surprises that she's not a betula. You were with her before you got married, because that's what they do in Yehuda. In the Galil, you can make the claim because they're not together with their wives before, but in Yehuda, they are. So too, another Mishnah, number 34. V'chein kol shar hanashim. What happens if, God forbid, a woman's husband dies or she's divorced? Any woman, lo yit arsu, she may not get engaged to a new man, v'lo yinasu, and she may not get married, achi lehem shlosha chadashim, until after 3 months. Why does she have to wait 3 months? In case she's pregnant from the first husband, and you never know whose the child is. Rabbi Yehuda says the following: Hanasuras his asu. So married women from before can get engaged because there's no problem they might get pregnant. V'ha'arusais, and a woman who was only an arusa before Nebuch, her husband, died, yinasu, then they can get married straight away because obviously they're not pregnant. They weren't married yet. Chutz min arusais shebi Yehuda. Apart from those women in Yehuda, mipnei sheliba gas ba, because they were very familiar with each other before the wedding. And in fact, this is the reason given in the Gemara. Look in the Gemara number 35. But Yehuda nami makaimis makaimis yesh. There were different minhagim in Yehuda. Kedetanya amar Yehuda Yehuda arishona hayu mityachdim et achasa ve'ezakala. They allowed the chassan and kala to be together. Shar achas kodim knisasam l'chova. Sometime before, shortly before, they went to the chuppah. Why? Kedesha yehei libo gaspa. So they'd be familiar with each other. Ubegalil loy haya oisin. But they would not let them do that in the Galil. Very interesting. They wanted them not to be strangers on their wedding night. And therefore they said, okay, have a little bit of yichud beforehand. It's okay. And in Galil they said, it's really not okay. But in Yehuda, apparently, this is what they did. When did they do it? Number 36. Says Rav Vadi Baratanura, it's dafka when they went to make the Suda Sa'erisin, but base Avi, in Avi Akala, in the father-in-law's house, Biyuda, it was at the party. That's when they put them together to do the yichud. So you see, this is actually all coming together, because this statement in the Yerushalmi, that if somebody ate matzah, it's as bad as, this as bad as is exactly what they were coming to criticize that half of the Jewish people were doing in Yehuda. which is very interesting. In fact, the Talmud Yerushalmi says, look at the Talmud Yerushalmi number 37. I know we have a few minutes left, but we have to learn this source. It's absolutely fascinating. The Talmud Yerushalmi says the following. Why did they have this minhag in Yehuda? So the Bavli said it was so they could get to know each other. The Yerushalmi says a more sinister reason. B'Rishayna gazru shmad b'Yehuda. The Romans decreed shmad, destruction on the Jews in Yehuda. Shekain Masoras lahem ba'me'avasam, because they had a Masorah, says the Yerushalmi, she Yehuda harag et Esav, that Yehuda was the one that killed Esav. You know, we have a midrash that it was Chushim ben Dan that killed Esav at the burial at Maras HaMachpelah. They had another midrash that it was Yehuda. Dichsev yadcha ba'iref ayvecha. V'hayu hoilchim u'meshabdim bahem, so the Romans persecuted the Jews, v'ainsim et b'noisehim, and raped their daughters. V'gazru sheyehei aristaritios, they had a Roman soldier, boil tchila, who would sleep with the girl before she was allowed to get married. Now, what is that called? That's called jus primae noctis, which is well known, as it were, that in medieval times, in Roman times, they used to take away the girl from the chuppah and say, you are not going to be the person that has the relationship. First, she's going to be raped, God forbid, by a Roman soldier. So what did they do? Hitkinu, so Yehuda made a minhag, sheyehei ba'ala ba'aleha oida bebeis avia. Yehuda said, we are going to encourage them to be together in the parents' home in order to avoid the Romans taking her, because it's too late. You weren't the first one. You may as well not bother. Va'afal pi, look in underline, va'afal pi shebatal hashmad, and even when the Romans stopped doing this, haminag loy batal, they didn't stop doing the yichud. Ad kedei kach, and this you won't read in your Azgro Gemara, okay, although they did put it in the Talmud Yerushalmi, kalasoi shel Rabbi Hoshaya nichneses me'uberes. Rabbi Hoshaya's daughter-in-law came proud and pregnant to the chuppah because he followed Minhag Yehuda. He lived in Caesarea. They followed Minhag Yehuda, Rabbi Hoshaya, and his daughter-in-law was pregnant at the chuppah. A remarkable, remarkable thing. By the way, just in parentheses, I found that Rav Abadi Bar Tanura went from Naples, where he lived, to Eretz Yisrael. And he wrote a letter back to the people in Naples about his travels on his way to Eretz Yisrael. And on his way, he talks about the Jews of Palermo in Sicily. He said, this was in the 1500s. He says, the Jews of Palermo, I went to live in Sicily for a while, and they were very strict about certain things, but they were not so strict about other things, and a large number of the young women that came to the chuppah were already pregnant under the chuppah. Now, they had no excuse because they didn't live in Yehuda, but they lived in Sicily. Okay, different things go on in Sicily. But interestingly, when this was printed in English, they censored out that line because they didn't want people to think bad of the Sicilians, okay? Okay, there's other things you can say. But just to finish off, what's this got to do with Matza? What's this got to do with Matza? We see there was a minhag in Yehuda. And that exact minhag is what the Gemara screams about, that it's as bad as if you did this, which is what they were doing, and the Jews in the Galilee were trying to stop them doing. So we see on the last page, and I've just mentioned this outside, that one of the other things that the Jews of Yehuda did is they were lenient on Erev Pesach. There were different minhagim about working on Erev Pesach. Some people didn't work from the night before, some people didn't work from the morning. In Yehuda, they said, we won't work in the afternoon, that's enough already. And the Jews in the Galilee were very upset with them. You're not respecting Erev Pesach. Why might they not have respected Erev Pesach? Because they've lost the Beis HaMikdash. There is no Korban Pesach. Nah, it's all verfallen. It's not really. And Rav Chaim Ovadia said, he suggests that it could be that they were making early Pesach as well. They were eating the matzah. Why not? We make early Shabbos. We'll make early Pesach. And it doesn't really matter anymore anyway, because all these mitzvahs have gone because the Korban Pesach is not here anymore. And therefore, in Yehuda, he wants to suggest that they used to start the Seder early, not just eat matzah on Erev Pesach, but start the whole Seder early. And therefore, the Yerushalmi stands up and screams, if you eat matzah early on Erev Pesach, which you guys do, it's as bad as sleeping with your arusa before the chasna, which you guys do. And it could be that that's all part of it. And there's even, when we say on Seder night, we even make a drasha, which is, you might have thought you could eat matzah from Rosh Chodesh. No, you can't. You might have thought you could eat it even during the day. No, you can't. Why are we giving those droshes? I'm already sitting at nighttime. The Haggadah is banging on the head and saying, don't ever think you can eat matzah, start a Seder beforehand. You can't. You can't make early Seder. Again and again, it says that. And if you actually read that into the Mishnah that we saw before, you'll see it works as well. I don't know if this is speculative or not, but it's interesting for sure. And therefore, if you're running out of good conversations at your Seder, then think carefully about whether you want to bring this one up or not. Okay. I wish you a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. We should, please God, we'll meet after Pesach.